Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lecture we'll look at a linear regression model, but to get there we'll have to do some initial steps. The first thing we need to do is define our features and target, and once we have that we'll divide or split our data set into training and testing sets, and we'll use the training set of data to train our model, and then we'll use the testing part of our data set to test our model. Great. If you remember, in the previous lecture we used the info method to get some information about our house data set. For instance, it has the following columns: ID, date, price, bedroom, and so on. We have a total of 21 columns. What we'll do is we'll take 10 of these columns and use those as our features. So we'll take the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, square living, floors, and so on. Okay, so what I will do is I just prepared this. So we'll use these columns as our feature and save it in a variable called x. So x is equal to house, and then we indexed those 10 columns. So bedrooms, bathrooms, square living, square foot lot, floors, square feet, above, and so on. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 features. So I just considered these 10 features out of the 21 columns. So that will be our x, and we'll save our target in a variable called y. So y is equal to house, and then we'll use price, of course. Okay, so we'll build our model based on these features. Okay, and just to give you a preview of what we'll do later on is we'll consider maybe 15 features or 18 features and build another linear regression model on those new features, and then we'll compare the results with this regression model. Great. Okay, let's start. So the reason why I saved our features in uppercase X, whereas our target is in lower Y. The reason is because this capital X means it's a two-dimensional array, whereas the lowercase y means it's one-dimensional. So you will see this often in literature. Okay, but you don't have to save this in upper X and lower Y. You can use whatever variable that you want, but you'll see this often in literature, and most people use this. So for instance, to show you what I mean, if you call the shape method, so x.shape, you see here it's two-dimensional array, 21,613 rows by 10 columns. Okay, whereas if you call the shape method on y, you'll see that it's one-dimensional. Okay, that's why I have them in upper X and lower Y, but it doesn't matter. So this is just in case you are wondering why I chose upper X and lower Y. Great. So our model, we'll train our model on these features, on the specific 10 features. Great. The next thing we'll do is scikit-learn has a library or function known as the train test split method, and we'll use that method or function to train our data set. So the first thing we need to do is import that library from scikit-learn. So to do that, we need to say from scikit-learn.cross-validation import train test split. So from sklearn that cross_validation import train test split, train test underscore split. Okay, that's the method we will use, the train test split method. So what we'll do is we'll use this method to first split our dataset into training and testing data. So we'll split them into training and then testing datasets, and we'll train our model on those training datasets and then use the testing datasets to test our model. Okay, so if I go to scikit-learn, the documentation here, the train test split. So this is the method, and then we'll divide our data into training and then testing. So we have xtrain, xtest, ytrain, and ytest. So the test parts are the testing datasets, whereas the train part are the training datasets. Okay, and once we divide it into those training and testing datasets, we'll use the training sets, xtrain and ytrain, to train our model. And once we train our model, we'll use the testing dataset to test and see how well our model does. Okay, let's do that. So we have xtrain, xtest, ytrain, and ytest. So you'll see this commonly used. These variables are commonly used. But again, you can use any variable that you want. But be consistent throughout your methods. Okay, so we'll use the train test split method, and then we'll pass our dataset, our x and y that we defined earlier. Okay, and we can pass the optional parameter known as test size. So by default, 75, the test sizes 75 and 25%. So 75% will be used for training, and then 25% of the dataset will be used for testing. That's by default. If you don't pass the test size attribute, this default values will be used. But for our example, let's pass 0.3. That means we'll use 70% for training and then 30% of our dataset for testing. Okay, and there's also another variable, another attribute known as random state, and you can set this to whatever value that you want. Let me set mine to 7 or any number. So if you want to get the same result as me, you can set your random state to 7. That way we'll all get the same result. Okay, again, this is optional. Okay, now our x and y are divided into training and testing dataset. Okay, and you can also print out your xtrain and ytrain datasets. So for instance, I can say print xtrain dot shape, and let's also print our ytrain dot shape. So our xtrain, again, it's two-dimensional, 15,129 by 10, whereas your ytrain is 15,129. Okay, one-dimensional, two-dimensional. Again, your training dataset is, in this case, 70% of your dataset, which is 70% of 21,613. Similarly, if you consider your testing dataset, say print xtest.shape. So xtest is two-dimensional and it's 30% of your dataset. So 30% of 21,600 is 6484. Okay, so that's one thing to remember. And again, if you print out the shape of your ytest, that shape, you will again see it's one-dimensional and it's 6484. Great. Next, we can create our model. Before we do that, we need to import the linear regression from scikit-learn. So for that, we'll need to say from sklearn.linear model import linear regression. So from sklearn dot linear underscore model import linear regression. Okay, now that we have imported our linear regression model, the next thing we need to do is we need to instantiate the linear regression model. We need to create an instance of this linear regression class. Okay, so to do that, we simply call the linear regression method. So linear regression, and then we'll save this in a variable, whatever variable we want. I'll just save it in a variable called model. So this is instantiating our linear regression model. Okay, so here we are creating an instance of this linear regression class. So once we divide our dataset into training and testing datasets, we instantiate our linear regression model. And once we instantiate our model, we'll pass or call the fit method on our linear regression model. So the next thing we do is call the fit method on our model. And what this fit method does is it will train the linear regression model by using the training dataset. So we need to pass our training datasets, which are xtrain and ytrain. So x underscore train and then y underscore train. Great, and once we fit our model, we can predict by using the predict method. So we can take our model and then call the predict method and then pass xtest, and we can save this in a variable called, let's say, prediction. Okay, so these are the general steps. We start by instantiating our linear regression model, and then we use the fit method to train our linear regression model on the training datasets, and after that we can call the predict method to predict the price by using our model. Great, so just to recap what we did here, we first started by splitting our dataset into training and then testing datasets. Once we do that, we instantiated our linear regression model, and then we trained our model using the training datasets, and then we used our testing datasets to predict based on what our model did, based on our model. So we'll continue our discussion on linear regression model in the next lecture. Thank you, everyone.